Hello YouTube, Ronan Kazi. Legendary Summit. The Summit's one of my favorite places to go. It reminds me of the subway in the Division. It's essentially, you got 100 floors, you got different kind of map configurations, and then you have different kind of things that you have to do on each of these. Some of them are really tough and it make it stink. It's always pretty tough on Legendary. I'm running a Vile Jammer build. I'm not sure which build I'm running here, but I'm going to switch them in between here. Basically, the summit is an area to clear a floor. You got to do 2 sections. So you do 1 section, and then it will say clear the floor. You clear the 2nd section, and then you've gone through a floor. To get an exotic, you have to do 30 of those. So basically, you have to do like 60, which is a lot sometimes. But it does give you an exotic. You don't have to do it on Legendary. Doing a Legendary with any directives is tough because the directives on Legendary are really tough. We happen to have one called Ragers, and Ragers is always tough because once you kill one of the opponents, one of the AI, everyone gets, more health for a little bit until you kill them, and it's tougher. The other thing is it has radar off. So when the radar's off, you can't see where they're spawning from. So you get maybe spawn from behind. And so usually when you have those kind of builds, when you're playing that kind of situation, you're going to do something like you're going to be at max protection maybe, so you have people watching the back and the front. But we're a pickup group, normally called a pug. And so we're going through here. One of the benefits of any type of pulsing build is that you're going to see where the enemies are, so that kind of neutralizes that effect. I think the people I'm playing with are kind of low level, so we're not going to have a ton of damage. But it's fun. So I like this. There's no real pressure. There's no timing. Sometimes there's timing kind of things. But it's just a good way to test your builds. I like coming here to test my builds. I just like the whole deal of the summit. So we're clearing out here. Also, as you're going in between floors, sometimes I pulse because sometimes there's enemies in the hallways, unexpected enemies. So here we're on floor 2. And so one of the dynamics here is they'll have you, there might be a pulse, a EMP pulse, there might be a healing pot, and you can flip it on or off by turning off laptops. So that's the dynamic here. You have to turn off 3 of the laptops. In reality, how you should play these, if you were just strictly trying to beat the map, you just pull all the mobs in until you kill them. It's not an infinite supply of mobs. It's a finite set of mobs that if you can bring them to you, you don't really have to get out of cover. Excuse me. And so what you're seeing here is you're seeing a classical way to fight one of these is you have a choke point, which is the doorway in this case. And it goes both ways. It's a choke point for them and a choke point for us. What I would say, if we pulled back a little further, I'm up against the wall so I can reach him with pulse, which then is going to force them to come in because they're going to want to kill the person that's pulsing them. So in a perfect world, you have people with a bunch of turrets. You put a bunch of turrets out here on the floor here. You might have an artificer hide, and then you'd have someone either throwing seeker grenades or pulsing, and that would bring the people in. And you just keep mowing them down. And Legendary is one of those things where it's not just that if you have the most DPS or if you have the, it's kind of it forces you to play a lot in cover. It forces you to play the game maybe how the developers intended. And that's one thing about all games, period. So you imagine that people spend 3 years designing a game, and they have beta test, closed beta, open beta, and then they release the game. And invariably, once they get a wide audience, they got to patch it because people will break things, because people don't think like the game designers. So, for example, when I'm making builds or I'm thinking about how I want to play, I want to do something that's going to kind of break the system that the designers have thought up. So this is one of the reasons I'm so hopped up on the Vile Jammer build, because it's well, except for there when I die. But what Vile Jammer does is lets you damage people indirectly through doors, through walls, through floors, sometimes through locked doors where they can't get to you and you can just kill people. Now, when you're in a group, sometimes it's not the funnest, but sometimes when you're picking up a group, it might be great that you can do that. Sometimes if you're, hey, don't do it. Sometimes if you're, come right here. Sometimes if you're soloing and you just want to get it done, that's a great kind of build. But nonetheless, people spend a lot of time designing the games, and then we as the players break them. So you're looking for inefficiencies. You know, this is a thing you hear in the real world, you know, how exploiting markets. Hey, I got 2 dogs. One is Roxy and one is Caesar. Roxy, what do you got? I will squirt you. And so they are always antagonizing each other, and then they start barking. They've been a little bit better now that I've threatened them with the squirt gun situation. But anyway, so you're exploiting market inefficiencies. You're exploiting things in the game that people didn't realize. I think I made a mistake here where I tried to res someone. This is just a market inefficiency in my game play. A lot of times I think I can save someone or res them, and and lately, and probably in the last couple of days, I've died a lot doing that. So that's a bad on me. So we're getting close to one of the first changes here. And these Vile Jammer builds have kind of 2 or 3 main things in it. I want you to think about this like as a chassis. You can bolt different engines on, different tires for different races. So if it was a car analogy. So number 1 is you're going to have a Vile Mask. And what a Vile Mask does, if you ever put a status effect on an enemy for 10 seconds, that enemy will take damage depending upon, you know, what you have in there. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, I'm switching to build, and I'm going to label this. I'm switching to my high main Vile Jammer build. So it's my fastest build, my fastest pulsing build that has the most status effects. It has 0 health regen. So getting back to the main components of this build, Vile Mask puts this 10-second damage debuff that you can, by doing certain attributes in your gear, you can make that stronger or not. Number 2 is a backpack with the talent called Creeping Death. And Creeping Death spreads, so if you put a status effect on someone, everyone within 5 meters gets it. This is great for pushing on doorways or spawn points because you do 1 vial and you just get everyone. Also makes having the Scorpio shotgun pretty awesome. Also works with the blue screen at times. So those are 2 of the main components. And the third one is having a jammer pulse, which is an EMP pulse. And the EMP pulse puts a status effect on everyone, and it disorients humans for not that long, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. But more importantly, it triggers the vial. And it triggers the vial in an area of effect in a circle around you in a radius. So and it's really a sphere. So it's up floors, down floors, through walls in this sphere. Okay, I'm switching builds again here. And what I went to is my main, this used to be my main file jammer build. It has a lot of regen, so it has more survivability. It has more skill damage, so my turret does a little more damage. And it still has the vial effect, but it's, maybe 30,000 less damage per tick. So you're making these builds, this chassis, and you're putting different things for different situations. Maybe I need more survivability. Maybe I need more skill damage. If there's scenarios where you need single target damage. So the other types of damages that you have single target and multiple enemies. So you might tune this build so it's pretty good at both. And part of this, why do I care about damaging everyone if I'm not going to kill them? Well, if you're constantly putting pressure on the enemy, if they're constantly getting pressure, they don't rush you. If you ever want to see something happen, go into a legendary or heroic, fire your gun, and watch what happens. They'll start pushing on you pretty hard. That's Roxy. So as I started playing the Division 2, I had played it when it first came out. I loved it, played it for a while, and then for whatever reason, I stopped playing it. And then when I came back, I'd go in challenging. I was too scared to run on heroic, and I would do challenging, and maybe I'd do some heroics. And man, when we'd do an invaded mission, the Black Tusk would just kick our ass. The Johnny Fives and the dogs and the drones were just, it was devastating. So, a couple of times, especially like facing like maybe Keener, I was in a couple of groups and someone would have this jammer pulse and they would just be taken out or stopping the Black Tusk technology. So I was like pretty impressed with that. So that kind of got me on that kick. So started doing heroics quite a bit, and heroics ended up being kind of easy. As you learn the fights become easier. It's kind of, if you think about, if you've ever played basketball and you hear people talking about basketball, the game slows down as you get better and better at it. Well, in these heroics, as you know them better, they just slow down. They're very easy to do. The mechanics are predictable, and you can go through them like anything. So then at that point, you're thinking of ways that you can take advantage of that knowledge, and that's what I did with this file jammer. And I didn't invent it. This comes from all my gameplay, years of playing games. I want some type of the safest mode. My default mode is I can go through any content and not have to worry. I think sometimes, like in a game like World of Warcraft, they call it face roll on your keyboard. It doesn't matter how you hit the keys. No matter what you do, you just win. Nothing wrong with that when you want to get the content and see the story and those kind of things. And so that kind of gameplay where I could damage people from a safe spot is... it's something that I try to get in every game. What's the max amount of damage I can do without having any risk? So you have this chassis, you have this base that you're building these builds on. So it's a slider bar, so I can have the other thing I do in my one build is it recharges really fast. The vial jammer goes off like every 12.5 seconds, which means then if I throw secret grenades, those go off like in 19.5 seconds. So on my best build, it's the fastest, most status effect damaging, but I have no regen. So it's a little bit glass cannon-ish, which is a phrase from MMOs where you're a glass cannon. The build I'm using right now is one that I have a little bit, it's more even. And what you're going to find in most games in modern game design they want you to min-max, right? So in real life, you might say, I was a boatmate in the Coast Guard, so the saying about boatmates is a jack of all trades, master of none, because you have to know a little bit of how to do everything. So sometimes in games, I would prefer those builds. Let me tell you about the next change that's coming up. It's about right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a gunner build with the vial jammer. And I'm going to switch from the jammer pulse to the banshee pulse. And what that does, that's a directional pulse that disorientates the enemy, but it still applies the vial jammer. This is probably the best in any content. It's not omnidirectional, but any heroic or lower, because you don't face Black Tusk. And the people are stunned a lot longer. It's only directional, but that's how you're pretty much playing. You see, I just did that through walls, and I'm putting the vial on them, and they're disoriented. It is fantastic. And again, this is off this one build, this one piece. So why is that important? Well, there's a system in the division called expertise. And so what you can do, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. He's eating the carpet. Don't eat the carpet. With this expertise system, you can improve your armor pieces by 20% armor, so you can give them more armor. So if you're yellow or red, you can make yourself a little more tanky. And so what the good thing about that is, if you have a chassis, if you have a thing you're building on, you can have pieces that are high level expertise, but use them in 3 or 4 different builds for different type of situations. And so that's what's good about this build. You can do a lot of different things. On lower level content, you can walk through it. If you're on like story mode or hard, or you're taking little people through stuff, you hit a jammer pulse, it kills everyone. They tick out within the 10 seconds. You can do all heroic content. You can do all challenging content. You can just go through everywhere. So that's why I like that build. But more importantly, what I would say to you is this. Let's say you don't want to do a skill build. The thing I want you to think about here is build a chassis. Build something that you're going to base a lot of your builds around. It might be a certain exotic that you use with reds and blues. It might be those Sawyer knee pads that give you 30% if you stand still. It might be some kind of thing. You might use that with your tank build, and you might use it with your striker build. You might use Catharsis the mask, which gives a heal while you're in place, and that might be used in both. But you're building a system. You're looking at the game, and you're finding the gear you like and the style of play you like, and then you're building a base for that system, and then you're adding pieces on top of that. For example, I love Ridgeway because I like to damage people and get some healing back with the bleed, and so that's a basis for my tank build. But if I have DPS builds, I tend to try to work that in there too. So that's what this video was. You got 3 variations of the vial jammer. There's a 4th I use. It's a maximum defensive build. It's with a survival base with improvised gear in 3 of the pieces. So it gives you a total of 6 pieces that you can mod. I mod those pieces with all blues. I have improvised gear in some of these pieces on these vial jammers, and I mod those with skill recharge. That's how I get the skill recharge. And again, you could do improvised gear with reds, and you could put more crit damage, more headshot damage. So there's a lot of different things. But idea, build a base, then exploit that base to help your gameplay. All right, thanks everyone. Ronan Kazi signing off.